Do we hate the man so much that we refuse to save America? Seems so. Welcome back to Unmute. I'm Joshua. Today I want to talk about something that's very important, and that is the SAVE Act. And we're going to talk about why it's so important, why you should care, and how it's going to impact our elections. Now, it has to get passed in the Senate. That is the next step for the Save America Act. It's already been passed in the House, but currently the senators are on vacation, and we're also in a partial government shutdown.
That's messed up.
So we're also going to probably rant about that a little bit later. But first, I want to go through some of the background on the current laws of voter ID requirements in the states and how strict of requirements they have. We'll have 4 categories, really. There will be strict and non-strict, and in each of those, there will be photo ID and non-photo ID. So first, the best states that have the most strict voter identification laws, strict photo ID, Arkansas, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Ohio, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. Those are the states that have the best voter identification laws currently. States that have strict non-photo ID laws, Arizona, North Dakota, and Wyoming. Now let's go to non-strict. States that have non-strict voter ID laws are Alabama, Florida, Idaho, Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, and West Virginia. Those are the states that have non-strict photo voter ID. Lastly, the states that have non-strict non-photo voter ID requirements. Those are Alaska, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Iowa, Oklahoma, Utah, Virginia, Washington. Again, those are the states that have non-photo ID, non-strict identification laws. Now, for the states that have no identification laws required are California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Vermont. Those are the states that have no voter ID requirement. And it's also interesting to note that all of those states that have no voter ID are blue states, with the exception maybe of Pennsylvania, because it did go red in 24, but it is most definitely what we would call a swing state. It goes back and forth between Republican and Democrat.
They're real swingers.
All right, next, there's been a lot of polls that had to do with the SAVE Act and voter ID. And there's a lot of been accusations that these polls are just, polling conservatives and different things like that.
You are fake news.
So I wanted to read you the poll that the White House put out. So the prompt was, do you support or oppose the proposed Save America Act that would 1. Require proof of citizenship to register to vote, 2. Require voter ID, 3. Require states to remove non-citizens from their voting rolls, and 4. Require states to share unredacted voter rolls with the Department of Homeland Security. Now, 71% out of everyone who was polled voted in support of these requirements, and 29 voted against it. 70% of Americans, to say, support the SAVE Act. Now, if we could break that down by party, 50% of the Democrats who voted in this poll voted in support of the amendments, and 50% did not. It was 50-50 among the Democrat Party. And then obviously in the GOP, it was higher, 91% support and 9% opposed. So 91% of the GOP agree, and 50% of the Democratic Party, the Democratic voter base, agrees with the Save America Act. And that's not just the White House saying this. There's liberal polling that also shows that 50% of the Dems agree, and I think that was by Gallup. But it's interesting to note that we can't even hardly get the SAVE Act passed, especially in the Senate, because the senators are trying to filibuster the SAVE Act, and we'll talk about that again soon. But 50% of their voter base agrees, but not 50% of the representatives, not even any of them, maybe with the exception of John Fetterman and 1 or 2 more. And it's so flabbergasting to me that the senators who represent their party, it's in their title to be a representative, a senator for the people of their state, won't even represent their own voter base. All right, I want to go ahead and get into exactly what the bill contains and what it will mean for you at the polling booth. Now, I was in class the other day.
Okay, so story time.
And the professor asked me if I had my passport yet. And I replied, no, I haven't gotten it yet. I probably should in the future. And she said, oh, you're going to have to, because you're going to have it to vote under Trump's new rule. I said, oh, are you talking about the SAVE Act? She said, yeah, you're going to have the passport. And that's interesting because I've heard that from other news stations, and there's been all these predictions of what you're actually going to have at the polling booth. But it's not a hard and fast rule you're going to have the passport. So I simply looked it up, pulled it up on my phone, and the bill specifically reads identification that it complies with the Real ID Act of 2005. Because I had said, I think you just need your real ID, which would be like in South Carolina, they put a little gold star on your driver's license. I assume that's how they do it in other states. And she was like, oh, okay. And so it just goes to show that there's a lot of misinformation going around. So make sure you're being very careful of where you're getting your news and that it's trustworthy. So let's go into the official bill summary, and this is found on congress.gov. It states specifically the bill prohibits states from accepting and processing an application to register to vote in a federal election unless the applicant presents documentary proof of U.S. citizenship. That's very fair. In order to register to vote, you have to prove you're a U.S. citizen. Good.
Check.
The bill specifies what documents are considered acceptable proof of U.S. citizenship, such as identification that complies with the Real ID Act of 2005 that indicates U.S. citizenship. Further, the bill 1 prohibits states from registering an individual to vote in the federal election unless, at the time of the individual applies to register to vote, the individual provides documentary proof of U.S. citizenship. You see, that's the common theme, is making sure all the voters are U.S. citizens. Now, the numbers that are estimated of non-citizens voting are all over the board, especially depending on where you go. But most polls and studies admit that at least some proportion of non-citizens have been voting, even the very liberal studies. So I think these rules are important and they should be required because they're common sense requirements. 2, requires states establish an alternative process under which an applicant may submit other evidence to demonstrate U.S. citizenship. So it leaves that part up to the states and says the states can figure out what they deem as U.S. citizenship as long as it proves that they're a U.S. citizen. Now, you might ask, well, what do I need to get my Real ID if I haven't have it yet?
That's a good question.
So I went ahead and pulled the requirements for you. It's your proof of identity or lawful presence in the U.S., like your birth certificate, passport, employment authorization card, or permanent resident card, proof of social security, that you could be your social security card, a W-2 form, or a pay stub, 2 proofs of residency, and any name change documents that might apply. So it's wild to me that you need an ID for so many things in the United States, but in some of those states that I listed earlier, a lot of the very liberal states, they don't even require an ID to vote. And already in the United States, you need an ID for driving a car, buying alcohol, buying tobacco or nicotine products, opening a bank account, cashing checks, applying for a job, renting an apartment, buying a firearm from a licensed dealer, picking up controlled substance prescriptions, entering a bar, renting a car, opening utility accounts, applying for state benefits like Medicaid, SNAP, or unemployment, which ironically is the very, we could say, people group that liberals claim wouldn't be able to have or don't have the papers to get an ID. They have to have an ID in order to get any SNAP benefits or unemployment or Medicaid, and notary services and legal contracts. So you need an ID for all those. And you even need a real ID for boarding U.S. domestic flights, for TSA checkpoints, to enter federal office buildings, enter federal courthouses, access federal agency headquarters, visit secure federal facilities, and enter military bases. So go get your ID if you haven't, your real ID if you haven't yet. It will be very helpful. You may need your real ID in order to vote this June and November because you have the primary. All right, so a lot of people are trying to say exactly what you need, and in some states it might just be your real ID. In some states it might be a social security number, but there isn't a clear answer right now, and it will depend on what your state accepts as proof of citizenship. So the bill says real ID, but that's not necessarily considered a proof of citizenship in all states. So if it's passed, make sure you're checking with your state election commission, just going on their website, or maybe asking someone who's in your county Republican Party and going by that route, just to ensure that you don't have some sort of crisis at the booth. So the other claim of the whole SAVE Act is it constitutional? Because Article 1, Section 4 talks about voting, and it talks how states determine how their elections are held. And so some news organizations have claimed it was unconstitutional, like FactPact and others. So I want to read you Article 1, Section 4 that applies to elections. It says, quote, "The times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators." That last part of choosing senators just means drawing the district lines of where the senators are and the state district lines. Okay, so it does say that each state shall decide the times, places, and manner of their elections, but it also says that Congress can make a law altering the regulations of an election besides choosing the senators or drawing those district lines. So ID or verification, is that under times, places, or regulations? That's obviously under regulations. It's not talking about be at Smith Street at 7 p.m. on election day. That's talking about who is eligible to vote. That would be a regulation of which the Constitution explicitly says that Congress is allowed to make a law that would apply to all states having to do with the elections. So it's pretty safe to say that it is constitutional. Now, what's the current status of the SAVE Act, and what are certain representatives thinking? First, it's important to point out that Thomas Massie has actually been falsely accused of voting against it. He clarified this on X by saying, "There's a false rumor that I have voted against the SAVE Act today. I'll vote for it when it comes to the floor. I voted against a rule that allows it to get a vote, but the rule also suspends the House rules and allows spending bills to come to the floor with no 24-hour notice." So he practically said they tried to propose this rule that said that they could vote on a bill without a 24-hour notice, and he voted against that rule. He did not vote against the SAVE Act per se. So that's important to point out. Factually reports for the Senate, only one Republican is on the record explicitly opposing the SAVE Act, the Save America Act. That is Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who said she would not support the measure if it came to a vote because it would federalize elections and impose a one-size-fits-all mandate unsuitable for states like Alaska. So if you're watching from Alaska, call your senator because she's wrong.
Yes. This is very wrong.
And we need voter ID. So our Senate numbers right now are 53 Republicans to 47 Democrats, which are good numbers, and we should be able to get the vote if we can do it with a simple majority vote. But NorthJersey.com reported Democrats threaten to filibuster, a tactic that allows senators to prolong debate and prevent a vote, that is, without a 60-vote majority. Meanwhile, pressure is mounting from the president to eliminate the filibuster and pass the bill with a simple majority vote. After the most recent vote of Amendment 4732 to the SAVE Act on March 26, the Senate left for the congressional spring break and are expected to take up the Save America Act debate on their return on April 13th. So the biggest thing is when they return from break, of which Trump, and I would agree with the president, has been asking them to come back early because there's things we have to do. We need a fun TSA. We've got to get the SAVE Act passed. All these things have to do. It's not the time to go on vacation and let Senator Lindsey Graham, aimlessly wander around Disneyland alone. It is time to get these things that we need to do done before the midterms in order to have secure elections. Now, I'll take this opportunity, and any opportunity I get, to be honest, to underline how important midterms are.
Attention, everybody. Attention, please.
Because we just read those numbers of 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. You know how quickly a couple Senate seats can go? You know how quickly some of those House seats can go if we do not get out to the polling booths? And unfortunately, it is not always a good pattern. Normally, whatever party is controlling the White House tends to be very relaxed during the midterms and not show up. So like when Obama was president, Republicans tend to do very good in the midterms. When Trump was in his first term, Republicans did not do well. Democrats did well in the midterms, and they were able to get the House back. In Joe Biden's term, Republicans did very well in the midterms because we were motivated to make a change and to limit the Democrats' power. The Democrats are extremely, and I see this every day, working on the campaigns, motivated in this midterm. And so if we do not show up at the polls in big numbers, we will lose much of our majority both in the House and in the Senate, and that limits what President Trump is able to do because he can only do so much legally by executive orders. If you're a Democrat watching and you support these very simple amendments to keep our elections safe in the United States, your senator is probably not voting for this if they're of the Democrat Party. You should contact your senator, go on their website, send them an email, harass them with phone calls, because if this doesn't get passed when the senators return on April 13th, it may never get passed, and it will probably definitely not be passed before the midterms in June. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you wouldn't mind putting a like down below and also sharing the channel with a friend, I would appreciate it.